Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Decoding the Unknown. This one written by George. Thank you, George. The disappearance of flight MH370, the deadliest mystery in aviation. I remember when this happened, and it's just like, where did that plane go? Did some parts wash up someplace? I mean, we know it's not on like the Lost Island or whatever. It definitely crashed into the sea. But it is kind of wild that it's just lost. And why? It's been, what, a decade? Yeah, it's been a decade. 8th of March. 2014. God damn. Anyway, let's get into it, shall we? The format of the show, if you're new here, George has written it for me. I've never read it before. We're going to explore together, dear audience, so let's go. On the morning of March the 8th, 2014, 59-year-old Helena Panjaitan decided to treat herself to a well-earned lie-in. She had been up late the night before, you see, helping her 25-year-old son, Sirigar, pack his bags for his new life in Beijing. He was a son of whom she couldn't be more proud. The best child, she called him to anyone who would listen. Intelligent, charismatic, and endlessly kind to those around him. Really, what more could a mother wish for? Furthering this pride was the fact that the veritable jigsaw of life had recently all fallen into place for her favourite son. He had recently landed himself a cushy and well-deserved job with an oil company in China, hence the bag packing. And even better still, he had just gotten engaged to a beautiful and caring woman with whom he was madly in love. His life had never been better. And yet still, the only way from there was up. Because of this, Helena found herself a mother torn as she stood in the departure lounge of Kuala Lumpur International Airport on the previous night. On the one hand, she was deeply saddened to see her son flying the nest, but on the other hand, she could see he was clearly meant for bigger and better things that he couldn't achieve by her side, and so she buried her sadness, put on a big smile, and waved him off to start the next chapter of his life. As he began to disappear into the crowd, passport in hand, her sadness started to overcome her, but she steeled herself once again, reminding herself that they would be reunited soon enough. Or so she thought. Because little did she know neither she nor anyone else would ever see Sirigar ever again, because he was taking flight MH370, which not only never made it to Beijing, but disappeared en route, completely without a trace. This is one of my biggest fears. If someone asks me what my fears are, plane crashes. Like, I don't know why. I'm not afraid of flying. Like, I'll happily get in the plane and sit there and relax, but I just regularly, my most common recurring nightmare is that I'm in a commercial plane accident. That I'm just a passenger or a pilot on a commercial plane and it crashes and you're looking out of the window and the ground's coming up real fast and then the plane flips over and everyone's going crazy. This is just a recurring nightmare that I have and it's very unpleasant. Working from cafes. Isn't it nice? I've actually been deported. Not like literally from a country, but they're doing reconstruction work in my office and it is extremely loud. Not like literally in my office, but the communal areas of the building, like the hallway and stuff, they're all being redone and it's extremely loud. How is this related to today's sponsor, Surfshark? Well, I'm out at the coffee shop working. I even signed up to like a co-working space where I have my own office because I don't like working with other people around. But they've got public Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi there is just like unsecure. You just, I got to the reception, it's like, yeah, is the Wi-Fi password there? Nah, mate, just go on the Wi-Fi. And I'm like, okay, that sounds dangerous. So I use Surfshark, don't I? Of course I do, because they're today's sponsor, and also, as well as being today's sponsor, they are the best. Look, I'm way off script, but look, I've been sponsored by many different VPNs. And I am now just sponsored by Surfshark because my ad guy will be like, yeah, Simon, we've got this new sponsor from like, I don't know, Cryptic VPN or whatever. I bet that exists. I'm like, no, only Surfshark because I've tried them all. It is the easiest to use. It is fast. It is the best. It's just the best. I've tried them all. I'm so far off script. It's Surfshark VPN. What do they want me to say? It's a game changer. Yes, it is. It masks everything you do online. Obviously, it keeps your personal life private as you want it. No more snoopers, no more hackers. Log on to your bank feeling secure. And it gets better. Travel the world with one click. Maybe there's a show that's only available on Netflix in Canada or Japan or I don't know, wherever. Well, just use Surfshark VPN to hop on over to that country and boom, you're done. Access granted, baby. I said how easy to use it is. That it's just the best. Plus, you can do it on unlimited devices. Perfect. So look, enough. You want Surfshark. You need Surfshark. And I need you to get Surfshark. Go to surfshark.deals/DTU and use the promo code DTU for 4 months extra. Stay safe, stay connected, happy surfing. And now back to today's video. For 10 years now, this peculiar tale has captivated the world, and as the common narrative goes, the fate of MH370 is simply something that we will never know, a tragedy with an explanation that has been lost amidst the sands of time. But what if I was to tell you that we may just know what happened after all? Got your attention now, haven't I? Yeah, I really thought that this wasn't solved. Well, if that declaration most bold has pricked your ears, stay tuned, because in the next 90 minutes or so, I shall be explaining the lot to you. What do we actually know about MH370's disappearance? All the different explanations that have emerged over the years, and maybe, just maybe, the answer that may well be looming just on the horizon. So let's begin. How is there some answer now? It's been 10 years. What have we discovered? Oh my god, George, you've absolutely hooked me. I thought I knew about this. What do we know? The story of MH370's disappearance begins at 10:50 p.m. on the 7th of March, when Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah signed in for duty at Kuala Lumpur International Airport, followed shortly after by First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid 25 minutes later at exactly 11:15 p.m. Shah had arrived rather early, but for good reason, as today's flight was to be a training flight for Hamid, as he was currently completing a transition type training course, and so there was a fair bit of paperwork that he needed to complete before he got behind the stick. A transition type training course, if you're wondering, is just a training course that gives a pilot or first officer a bit of paper that says they're fully qualified to operate a certain aircraft, or type, as it is known in the business. I mean, it's more than a bit of paper, though. It's like, yeah, if you're flying a plane, what plane was this? Have we mentioned what type of plane it is yet? Boeing 777. Nice plane. From an Airbus A330 to a Boeing 777. That's a big difference. So this is a big course to learn how to fly a completely different type of plane. Specifically, Hamid was converting his training over from an Airbus A380, which Malaysian Airlines used exclusively on their short-haul routes, to the Boeing 777, which was a similar mainstay of their medium and long-haul routes. A Boeing 777 is the Dreamliner, right? It's a super nice plane. Big windows, nice atmosphere inside, really pleasant. No need to get suspicious at this early stage either, because Hamid had hit it out of the park during his training, with there being no incidents of any kind during this training. Things had gone so well, in fact, that this flight was to be the penultimate part of his course, with him being slated to be recommended for his final assessment if this flight went as well as his previous ones. With them both signed in for duty, the next errand on their to-do list was the pre-flight briefing, which is exactly what it sounds like, a sit-down chat where they both have a verbal once-over of their daily schedule to make sure they're both singing from the same song sheet, going over things like route and altitudes that they intend to use, weather conditions, aircraft maintenance logs, splitting up the duties of the pilot and first officer, that kind of thing. And again, all appeared to be well at this stage. The weather in Kuala Lumpur and Beijing was near as damn it perfect, and things appeared similarly rosy between the two, with there being no concern greater than some mild winds over the South China Sea that, at worst, would only cause the mildest of turbulence, the stuff of child's play for that piloting pair. Then, with there being no red flags that told them the flight wouldn't be safe to undertake thus far, Hamid and Shah set about drafting their flight plan, a physical document that all commercial pilots must file before takeoff that covers two critical safety aspects. First, telling air traffic control vaguely where they will be so that they can minimize the risk of mid-air collision, and secondly, forcing the pilots to sit down and actually think about how much fuel they will need. The second reason may sound odd at face value, as what pilot wouldn't put enough fuel in their aircraft, but every rule in aviation is crafted because of past fatal mistakes. Yeah, there was a famous one where I think they just metriced or imperialed it, and they put the wrong amount of fuel in the plane and it ran out of fuel in midair. It was called the Gimli Glider. And the plane had to make basically an unpowered landing at a random airstrip, like a full-on commercial plane. And the pilot pulled it off, which was incredible. And now, every time something goes wrong in aviation, I believe they have a rule where it's like, if you do something wrong and you come forward and say, I made a big mistake within like the first 24 hours or something, they're like, okay, it's forgiven, because the benefit that they get from knowing what that mistake was outweighs the benefit to punishing an individual pilot or something like that. Aviation safety really is ingenious. It's very impressive. Sadly, pilots can be just as negligence-prone or careless as anyone else, and with prior mistakes such as United Airlines Flight 173 and Aeroflot Flight 366, which crashed in 1978 and 1963 respectively due to running out of fuel, make great examples of this fact. An insistence by the powers that be that sitting down and properly considering fuel levels was justified. Bringing it back to MH370. While drafting their flight plan, Hamid and Shah opted to stick 49,100 kilograms of fuel into their 777, a more than reasonable enough amount to make it to both Beijing and their pre-scheduled alternate airports in Jinan and Hangzhou. Alternate airports being backup airports you can use if something goes wrong at your intended airport, with them being intentionally pre-selected so that they are already in the pilot's minds if something goes wrong, and thus not leaving them to have to figure out where to go next while the cockpit is already highly stressed and under pressure. On an average burn rate, this would give a 777-200ER, the specific type of aircraft operating MH370 on that day, a flight time of 7 hours and 31 minutes. More than enough considering the route typically burns 37,200 kilograms. Goddamn, planes use a lot of fuel. That's an insane amount of fuel. And since I've mentioned the type of plane operating MH370 a few times now, both specifically by variant and generally by model, let's take a few moments to zoom in on it in depth for some vital context as we move forward. As already said, the airplane in question was a Boeing 777, specifically a 777-200ER variant. The 777 first entered service back in 1995 with United Airlines. Wait, maybe this isn't the Dreamliner. What is it? Because that's a much more recent plane. It's a Boeing Dreamliner, but I feel like it has also got a number. Oh, it's a 787, isn't it? Yeah, it's a 787, my mistake, sorry. It's a wide-body jet intended to bridge the gap between Boeing's big boy quad-engine 747 jumbo jet that can fly 500-plus people to the other side of the globe direct, and its small-body jets like the 737, which British viewers will be familiar with from their times flying Ryanair, and American viewers will know when they fly Southwest. Yeah, it's I think the Airbus A320s, the other one that commonly flies these routes. A small, narrow-body jet. As for the specific variant, 200ER, no need to overcomplicate it, that's just an extended range version, hence ER model of the base 777-200, able to fly a maximum of 14,305 kilometers compared to a standard 9,700. Malaysia Airlines took delivery of its first 200ER in 1997, and after 5 years of further acquisitions, they ended up with 12 of them in their fleet. As for the specific plane that was operating flight MH370 when it disappeared, 9MMRO. It was actually the last 200ER the airline acquired, being delivered in May 2002. It also appears to have had an almost perfect safety record prior to its disappearance. I asked the Civil Aviation Authority of Malaysia to email me over its file, and there was nothing damning at all to be found, not a single major incident recorded, and only a handful of inconsequential minor incidents to be noted, the worst of which being one in August 2012, where it had a wingtip sliced off after banging into a China Eastern Airbus A340 at Shanghai Pudong Airport. This was quickly fixed, and no follow-up incidents related to the damage were noted. As for current damage to the aircraft, 6 so-called deferred defects were noted in the aircraft's logs, these being faults which have been identified, checked over by a qualified engineer, and deemed as being non-critical to the aircraft's safe operation, and thus didn't stop it flying. These 6 included minor things such as the in-flight entertainment system not displaying an arrival time and a bathroom light being cracked. It's really minor stuff and somewhat more eyebrow-raising, but still ultimately minor stuff such as a small 1 by 1 inch size hole on the underside of the right engine's acoustic liner, a sound-absorbing layer on the inside of the engine housing, so really it was nothing worrying at all. If you think that any of that actually sounds major, trust me, it isn't. Next time you're boarding an airplane, try sticking its registration code into an aviation database and see what comes up. Aircraft fly with minor, non-safety critical defects all the time. Probably give it a miss if you're a nervous flyer, though. Yeah, immediately I'm thinking, I do not want to do that. I don't want to know what's wrong with the plane that I'm flying on. I really don't, because I'm not going to get off it. It's like Final Destination style. Although, every time I'm on a plane, and they close the door, I'm like, oh my god, what if it's that final destination? What if I should have got off the plane? I'm not nervous. I'm not a nervous flyer. But I just am afraid of dying in a plane crash. I once looked this up on the Cessna that I did my private pilot's license in, and it crashed big style in 1983, but I digress back to the story. That's cool, George. I didn't know you had your PPL. I was working on that, and then I had kids, and then I had no more time. But once the kids are in school, in like a couple of years, I am very keen to get back and finish my PPL. With all of the pre-flight checks and preparations completed without incident, MH370 was soon enough loaded up with 239 souls, 227 passengers and 12 crew members to be precise, and then started the process of getting into the sky, being given permission from Air Traffic Control, ATC, to push back at 27 minutes past midnight. It then taxied over to runway 32R, and then, when in position, it was given final permission to take off 12 minutes later at 0040 hours. 83 seconds later, MH370's rubber had left the tarmac, and it was airborne. So far, so normal. Things continued to be normal for the ascent too. Having cleared the airport without incident, MH370 was given permission to climb to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet at 0050 hours, which was achieved again without incident 11 minutes later at 10100 hours. When at cruising altitude, all still appeared well. MH370 kept checking in, as would normally be expected, for example contacting ATC at 107.56 seconds to confirm that it was still flying at 35,000 feet, and responding to our transmission at 1:19, in which the flight crew were informed that they were leaving Malaysian airspace, and so were to contact Ho Chi Minh ATC in Vietnam and pass into their control, to which SAR calmly responded, "Good night, Malaysian 370.
Good night, Malaysian 370.
But that would be the last voice contact that anyone would ever have with the flight, as the radio in Ho Chi Minh City remained silent. MH370 had vanished. To begin with, MH370's disappearance went totally unnoticed. The Malaysian air traffic controller had just handed control of the plane over to his counterpart in Vietnam after all, and so when Nex glanced over at his screen and saw that it could no longer be seen, he naturally assumed that it had simply passed out of radar range and was now under the watchful gaze of his Vietnamese counterpart, so he returned to his other duties without giving it a second thought. But of course, we know it hadn't just passed into Vietnamese airspace, and fortunately this fact was picked up on by their controllers. After all, they had the flight plan that Shah and Hamid had filed earlier on, and thus had a rough idea of when they should be expecting it to appear on their radar. They gave it a few minutes to begin with. After all, any number of things could cause a small delay here and there, so no reason to panic just yet. You gotta be sitting there being like, this is normal, this is normal, this is a bit weird, this is odd. Like, oh, where's that plane? It should be here by. Oh, it's a big disaster. Something's gone wrong. It's missing. You just get more and more panicky. I'm sure air traffic controllers don't get panicky. They're just like, they're in robot mode. When it still failed to appear down the line, however, they started proactively trying to track it down, and 18 minutes of increasingly desperate communications over the airways ensued. At first, it was nice and calm. Would MH370 please respond? To which they expected to hear a quick and polite response informing them of whatever the cause of the delay and what their new ETA was for hitting their airspace. When this was met by silence, the question was then repeated in a slightly more pissed off and assertive tone, because after all, your mind wouldn't immediately assume disaster, would it? But when this in turn was met by silence, the anger was replaced by mild dread, because to not respond to 2 messages in a row would constitute incompetence the likes of which you'd scarcely find in the skies, so they knew that something bad was almost certainly happening at that very moment. To try and get to the bottom of it, another call was put out. Can all planes in the area contact MH370 and report back? But this too came to naught, and did nothing but further cement the controller's sense of foreboding as aircraft after aircraft reported back saying they couldn't reach their ominously absent colleagues. According to international aviation rules, the Vietnamese controller should have contacted Kuala Lumpur no more than 5 minutes after failing to establish contact with MH370. Best case, they would know something that they didn't that would put their mind at ease and bring everyone back from panic stations. And worst case, they'd be able to assist the search with their own systems, but due to the stress of the situation, Kuala Lumpur ended up not being notified until 19 minutes after the fact. Well, that's weird. Like we were speaking earlier about how good airline safety is and how there are all these procedures in place. Just because they're panicking is no excuse for not reaching out. Like, there's clear protocols to follow. That's the point of protocols. When they were notified, however, they acted immediately, getting on their radio and calling out Malaysian 370, you read? But again, only static replied. With little else that could be done, both towers continued in vain to try and raise MH370, and a second controller in Kuala Lumpur got on the phone to Malaysian Airlines' operations center, where they were told that MH370 was on course and in Cambodian airspace. This is despite the fact that the flight plan had at no point called for going that way, and that controllers in Phnom Penh had already confirmed that they hadn't seen hide nor hair of MH370. That's a weird thing to say, isn't it? So why did they say this? Well, that's because, for some reason, the operator at Malaysia Airlines' reaction to the developing situation was to hop onto the flight radar website, punch in MH370, and upon being told by the website that it was over Cambodia, report that back to Kuala Lumpur Tower as fact. Really? Like, you don't... Surely Flight Radar, the website and app that allows anyone to track planes, gets their data from somewhere. And surely these people have access to that primary data rather than needing to go onto this website. And bonus fact, when a transponder goes non-responsive, flight tracking websites such as Flight Radar basically make up what it is doing because their customers tend to panic if the flights they are tracking, full of their loved ones as they are, suddenly state flight cannot be found, transponder not responding, or any other similarly ominous phrase, and Flight Radar and such similar websites neither want to panic family members falsely if it's just a minor technical boo-boo, nor be the ones responsible for breaking the news if something serious has gone awry. Fortunately, at least, other more competent members of staff at Malaysia Airlines soon became aware of the situation, and fearing the worst, the Earth itself began to move as they thought up every scheme possible that would allow them to figure out what the hell was going on. The peak of this effort was a phone call made to MH370 at 2:39 a.m. via satellite phone. The call wasn't answered, but its satellite data unit did at least acknowledge the transmission, meaning that although no one picked up, MH370 was still in the air, but this offered no reprieve, as a responsive but otherwise silent airplane is bad news, no matter how you cut it. It's not as bad news as no response, though, because then you're like, well, it's not there anymore, is it? It's in the sea. If it's not responding, at least there's still hope. Thoughts immediately went to Helios Airways Flight 522, a 2005 flight in which the pilots forgot to activate the pressurization system before takeoff, rendering everyone on board unconscious once generalized hypoxia set in, after which the plane then flew itself on autopilot before it expended all its fuel, crashed into the ground, and killed 121 people. Oh my lord, how have I never heard of that? That's crazy. Naturally, the prospect of something similar happening to their plane terrified those initial responders, and so the incident was soon escalated right up through Malaysia Airlines' chain of command, right to the very top. Come 3 a.m. exactly, the Malaysia Airlines crisis director had made it into the office, and after failing to find any sign of MH370 on the company's internal tracking system, he declared a code red emergency, the greatest possible level of emergency that could be declared. Then, as everyone in the operations team began racing blurry-eyed into work, as per emergency protocols, the ever-swelling team began doing anything and everything further they could to raise MH370, but it all came to naught. The first thing that I find interesting about this is that it just so happened to be between the two airspaces. So this plane disappeared just at a time where there would be minutes of no one missing it, which makes me think, like, there's foul play somewhere. It's very interesting. It's very convenient. This continued for a time, but eventually they could ignore the macabre elephant that stood in the corner of the room no longer. They had to accept that it may well have crashed, and thus, per aviation rules, the Malaysian government was notified of the situation at 5:30 a.m. They immediately put Kuala Lumpur Aeronautical Research Coordination Centre search and rescue teams on alert, both on the ground and in the sky, and then at 6:30, when MH370 failed to land in Beijing, they went into action and made full steam for MH370's last recorded position in the South China Sea. In desperation, the attempts to make contact back at the operations center continued, including one last attempt to contact the aircraft via satellite phone at 7:13 a.m. This connected just as it had previously, and once again was not answered, very much implying that MH370 was still flying. When was it due to land at China? Oh, 6:30, so 45 minutes later. Yeah, it had enough fuel to keep flying for that amount of time. Further supporting the idea that it hadn't come down yet is the fuel levels, because if you recall, MH370 was loaded with enough fuel for 7 hours and 31 minutes of normal flying, meaning that it could still well be flying for up to another hour after that call was made. Next came a press update to announce the bad news to the world, which occurred at 7:24 a.m. The announcement was a drab affair that calmly and directly outlined the situation. MH370 was missing. It was last seen transitioning between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace. There had been no distress call, and the situation was assumed to be a normal plane crash. This was then followed by a surprising announcement from the Malaysian Air Force on the 9th of March. They had kept their eyes on MH370 long after it disappeared from civilian view. Luckily, their radar systems were so-called primary radar which works by bouncing signals off of objects proactively, rather than the secondary radar used by air traffic controllers, which communicate with aircraft by talking to their transponder. To say this announcement was an unfathomable boon would be putting it mildly, because now there were a whole 2 extra hours of laser-precise understanding of MH370's movements, which said that after the transponder went dark, it took a hard left just after entering Vietnamese airspace, and then settled on a southwesterly heading that took it back toward the Malay Peninsula, before it then skirted the border of Thai and Malaysian airspace and made a wide right around Penang Island, before it then bizarrely rejoined its expected flight path and kept on following its expected waypoint until it passed out of radar range. This is extremely weird. So someone is flying the plane wrong. They're taking that plane and they're driving it somewhere. Flying it somewhere. Let's assume it's one of the pilots. But then it goes back to being on its regular flight path. So do you think one of them went crazy, tried to take the plane over and fly it their own way, and then the other pilot regained control at some point but couldn't contact anyone because the communication system had been taken out somehow? It's weird. This new information was absolutely invaluable to the Kuala Lumpur Aeronautical Rescue Coordination Center, who used it to redraft their search area to be significantly larger, but also, they hoped, much more precise. Consequently, they were now covering not just the area south of Thoshu Island, but also extending it to skirt across the Strait of Malacca and adjacent waters. They had a few promising pings on their proverbial radar in this early stage, a report of debris here and there, the odd oil slick dotted about the sea, all of which were hoped to be much-needed puzzle pieces that would help them figure out what the hell happened to MH370, but alas, no. All of the evidence recovered in the early stages of the search was ruled definitely not to have any connection with the missing plane. Soon enough, other countries began lending their assistance to the search. The first on the scene were the UK, Australia, Singapore, and New Zealand, who sent 34 aircraft and 40 ships between them, being spurred into action courtesy of the Five-Power Defence Arrangements of 1971, a series of bilateral defence treaties between the 5 Commonwealth nations, and in Australia and New Zealand's cases, the fact that they both had their own citizens on board certainly heightens their want to assist with or without a treaty. China was the next nation to lend its resources to the search, formally throwing its hat in the ring on the 11th of March, when the China Meteorological Administration activated the International Charter on Space and Major Disasters, a 15-member organization whose purpose is to, quote, provide a unified system of space data acquisition and delivery to those affected by natural or man-made disasters. In addition to just rallying further international support, however, they also dispatched 18 warships, several smaller Coast Guard vessels, a civilian cargo ship, and an Antarctic icebreaker to assist directly with the search. China had good reason to be so invested in finding MH372. The majority of souls on board, 153 of the 239, were Chinese citizens. Come the 17th of March, following further requests of assistance by the Malaysian government, another 11 nations had joined the search. Exact numbers fluctuated as the many nations involved pulled and added further ships for various reasons, but it peaked at a maximum of 60 ships and 50 aircraft. So then, what was found by this international coalition of Herculean proportions? Well, one section of the coalition, spearheaded by Australia and prompted by analysis of Chinese satellite data, began searching the southern Indian Ocean west of Australia with the lead goal of trying to detect underwater signals from MH370's black box. They covered a vast 600,000 square kilometer area and found nothing. Well, basically nothing anyway. They found the odd signal here and there, including particularly promising ones found by both Australian offshore patrol vessel ABFC Ocean Shield and the Chinese patrol ship Haksun 1, but given further analysis, both of them proved to be inconclusive. They may have picked up the black box, there's just no way of ever knowing for sure. Following that extensive but inconclusive effort, a pivot in the search strategy was announced during a meeting involving representatives from Australia, Malaysia, and China on the 5th of May. Australian Deputy Prime Minister Warren Truss revealed plans for a comprehensive oceanographic mapping of the search zone. This new phase aimed for a precise understanding of the ocean floor's topography to ensure the effectiveness and safety of subsequent search operations. The mapping would provide a level of detail far surpassing previous surveys, utilizing a resolution sharp enough to discern features as small as 100 meters across. To accomplish this ambitious task, the Chinese hydrographic survey ship Zhu Kazhan set sail in May and was later joined by Dutch survey vessel Fugro Equator in June after being contracted by the Australian government. Zhu Kazhan stayed on the scene until September, at which point, having surveyed over 208,000 square kilometers of seafloor, it returned to China and left the Fugro Equator to tie things up, with it doing so come December. While this stage of the search was aimed purely at building a foundation for later searches, there lingered hope that through pure fluke of fate, MH370, or at least large parts of it, would be found resting on the sea floor. Anything concrete at all at that point was the hope, if admittedly a very faint one, that was desperately clung to. Tragically, however, no such miraculous evidence was happened upon, and so all eyes went forward to the next stage of the search, a very, very expansive underwater search that would run from October 2014 to January 2017. Oh my god, that's such a long time. The ocean's so big. And you're looking for a plane which is big but is really small, like in the grand scheme of things. This phase's aims were laid out on the 26th of July, when the Australian Transport Safety Bureau outlined a new search zone of 60,000 kilometres near the Broken Ridge, oceanic plateau 2,000 kilometres or so off the west coast of Australia. This area was selected based upon expert analysis of previous surveys and was specifically held back until the previous oceanographic mapping survey was nearing completion, just in case anything game-changing was uncovered. This again was an international effort, with Malaysia dispatching an expert team from Petronas, a state-run oil company, for its its part, and Australia for theirs, contracting out the offshore supply vessel Go Phoenix and the marine exploration firm Phoenix International to crew it, and they had a cracking track record for this kind of thing, having previously recovered the black boxes from Air France Flight 447, Yamenia Flight 626, Adam Air Flight 574, and Tunisia Flight 1153. The effort was simply exhaustive, and it continued until the 17th of January 2017 when the entire search effort was called off. By this time, the 6 vessels in total that contributed had gone way beyond the original goal and mapped an incredible 120,000 kilometers, and they'd found absolutely nothing. So what can we, as interested onlookers, learn about MH370's fate from that absolute litany of varying efforts? In short, bugger all. Absolutely bugger all. There is no pivot in the story or linchpin bit of evidence that I've been holding back for dramatic effect. All of the effort, all of the time, and potentially as much as $160 million that had gone into the search yielded, in real terms, nothing. But that isn't quite the end of things just yet, however, because while that ultimately fruitless search effort was pressing ever on, pieces of MH370 began to wash up all over the world, as many as 20 of them in fact, with 18 of them being identified as being very likely or almost certain to originate from MH370, and 2 others being assessed as probably from the accident aircraft, as outlined in a 2017 report by the Australian Technical Safety Bureau titled The Operational Search for MH370. I didn't realize so many parts are washed up. I thought a few years ago they found like one big part and were like, ooh, how exciting, a part of this plane we finally found. But okay, there have been more parts found. I thought I knew this story quite well. I didn't realize that. The first confirmed part of MH370 was found on the 29th of July 2015 on the shores of Reunion Islands. It was visually confirmed as a flaperon, very likely from a 777, and it was then transported by local authorities to France to undergo proper laboratory examination. This investigation identified various parts and serial numbers on the internal elements of the component, which were then cross-referenced with the manufacturer's records. This comparison verified that the component was indeed a Wright flaperon from 9M MRO. It is believed that this piece may finally yield the first bit of meaningful evidence about where MH370 went down, as, to quote, "There was a significant amount of goose barnacles attached. After taking advice from an expert at the Western Australia Museum, we came to understand that the attachment and growth of the barnacles may reveal some evidence in relation to where the flaperon started its drift in the Indian Ocean and the passage that it took in the succeeding 500 days before it came ashore. For the oldest and largest barnacles, it was thought that this may yield some evidence as to where MH370 may be located." Unfortunately, that proved not to be the case, as, quote, "This advice was provided to the French investigation team who performed some analysis on the flaperon barnacles. The results of the analysis were inconclusive." Then there was a section of the right-wing leading edge known as the right-hand engine cowling that was found on the coast of Mossel Bay, South Africa in March 2016. This part, which covers the engine and gives that nice smooth aerodynamic outer surface, was immediately speculated to be from 9M MRO, the big giveaway being the very clear leftovers of a Rolls-Royce logo who manufactured the Trent 892 engines bolted under the aircraft's wings. Its being from a 9M MRO was later confirmed through cross-referencing of serial numbers and maintenance records. The location where this piece was discovered for further narrowing down MH370's impact points, the fact that it had drifted all the way down to South Africa, clearly implied that it can't have penetrated that deep over the Indian Ocean when it went down. The currents simply wouldn't have flowed in a way that would have pulled it in that direction had it gone the full distance possible on the fuel it was carrying. Another noteworthy piece was the right outboard flap, which was found drifting near Pemba Island, Tanzania, in June 2016. This component, crucial for managing the aircraft's lift during flight, not only visually matched that of a 777, but was confirmed from serial numbers to be from 9M MRO. According to the Malaysian crash reporter, a detailed examination of the flap was undertaken, which involved metallurgical analysis and expert assessments of the damage patterns observed on the component. These analyses revealed that the flap was most likely in a retracted position at the time of separation from the wing, which is consistent with a high-speed, uncontrolled descent into the ocean. This conclusion was drawn from the absence of damage typical of a flap's extended impact, which would indicate a slower speed or an attempted controlled landing or ditching. Furthermore, the location and drifting pattern of the flap, combined with oceanographic drift analysis, corroborated the hypothesized crash region in the southern Indian Ocean. This was then further supported by interior components that later washed up, which had 9M MRO entered the water level and slowly would never have separated from the airframe. Now, as a man who is paid by the word, I'd just love to explain every single piece of debris recovered to you all in detail, but unfortunately, that wouldn't actually add much to our understanding, as they all more or less just repeat variations of what we've already learned from the pieces I chose to highlight. MH370 likely entered the Indian Ocean at speed, and that's about it. Combine that with everything else we learned earlier in the chapter, the weird movements all over the place, the non-responsive radio, the lack of any distress call, and the lack of any weird behavior by the flight crew, and we've got a real mystery on our hands. So now, let's bring this chapter to a close and start looking at some possible explanations. Conspiracy theories. Where better to start our explanation deep dive than by looking at the absolutely batshit mental ones, as let's not beat about the bush and pretend otherwise here, they are by far and away the most entertaining. Yes, they are, because they're like fiction. Fiction's more entertaining than fact often, because it's made up. Such a declaration may sound like a bold thing indeed to the regular Mr. Whistler enjoyers in the audience, as across his extended universe, be it here on Decoding the Unknown, over on Casual Criminalist, or even mega or side projects, I'm typically Mr. Beige, Mr. Fence-Sitter, Mr. Devil's Advocate. And yet, some of the theories regarding MH370 are so disconnected from reality, so downright weird, that even I cannot find a way to humor them, and so I'm forced to climb down from the rigid fence I normally place between my cheeks and instead adopt a tone of pure mockery and derision. Yeah, it's fine. Like, you don't have to fence it on stuff that's clearly batshit insane. Like, it was aliens, and let's give this proper consideration. No, let's not. Further to that, so confident am I in every theory presented in this chapter being total verbal diarrhea that I'm going to lay down a proclamation most bold. Should any of them later be vindicated, somehow I will personally present a future episode of this fine, illustrious podcast stark naked. And believe me, folks, that won't be enjoyable for any of us. Yeah, also, it would get my YouTube channel cancelled the shit out of. Like, if you just did an episode like this naked and uploaded it, that would be the end of the channel. They'd just be like, whoa, bro, community guidelines, come on now, you can't be naked. So, with that said, let's begin, starting with the black hole theory.
What did he say?
Yes, you heard me right, there's a black hole theory. The theory is exactly what it sounds like, one that claims a black hole appeared over the South China Sea, and then, this is my personal favorite bit, deliberately flew into it. And why not? If you're going to say something mental, you might as well go for gold and say something proper mental. Yeah, like a conscious black hole. Wait, is the plane flying into the black hole, or is the black hole flying into the plane? I mean, both are insane. He's like, oh, look, a black hole. Woo, let's fly in there. To begin with, this theory was the preserve of obscure and deeply buried internet forums, where it belongs, and no more credible a proclamation of doom than ones made on street corners by those fine and learned fellas who cover their noggins with tinfoil hats. But then, for some God only knows reason, Don Lemon of CNN decided to mull over the possibility in a 2014 segment. I won't show you the exact clip because CNN are very trigger happy with the copyright claims. Yes, they are. But it basically has Don outlining the commonly accepted theories and then introducing the idea of a supernatural explanation while pointing to the TV shows Lost and The Twilight Zone as a point of reference. You can't use that as a point of reference. It's a fictional TV show about a magical island. And then giving a black hole as a specific explanation. Fortunately, experts were on hand to immediately shoot this idea down and be like, yo, Lemon, have you lost your mind? With one such expert being Mary Schiavo, former Inspector General of the US Department of Transportation, who simply said, a small black hole would suck in our entire universe, so we know it's not that. I mean, also, you might be an expert in transportation and you're 100% right, Mary, that it's not a black hole, but a small black hole would not suck in our entire universe. Because there's loads of black holes that are absolutely massive, and they don't suck in the whole universe. They maybe suck in the whole Earth, maybe the solar system if they're feeling big. A bit of an exaggeration perhaps, but her heart was in the right place. Now, I want to be fair to Dom here. When I first read about this segment from a third-party news source while researching this topic, I had assumed that it was going to be a piece of typical low-effort legacy media clickbait trash, one designed to hawk in a few more dollars in advertising revenue on the company's long, slow collapse into obscurity and irrelevancy, as that was very much how those third parties presented it. But instead, much to my relief, it instead appears to be a very intentional counter-propaganda piece, one in which Don floats the idea with the specific intention of seeing it debunked, as he does call it preposterous, as he explains it, and none of the other, no doubt carefully picked guests actually endorses it. Okay, so it's just a bit of a gambit. That makes a lot more sense than someone actually entertaining this seriously. As for other perspectives of the black hole conspiracy theory, actually, I can't do it anymore. I think I'm at the risk of actually knocking a few digits off my IQ if I continue to humor this any further. Of course, a black hole didn't swallow up MH370, so let's just move on, shall we? Yes, please, George, let's just move on from this insanity. Another much discussed MH370 conspiracy theory is the so-called Freescale conspiracy. This theory draws attention to 20 employees from Freescale who were on board the flight, that being a San Francisco-based company that specializes in the development and manufacture of microprocessors, sensors, and other technologies vital for the automotive industry. This theory posits that those individuals who were among the company's best minds, and many of them had controlling stakes in the company and the technology it developed, were targeted for elimination as part of a covert operation aimed at acquiring Freescale's patents. I don't think that's how acquiring patents works. Although I suppose if the company goes to because so many of its brilliant employees died in a horrible plane crash, then their stock price or whatever is going to go low, or their value, and someone's going to buy them and get all those patents. So that could make sense. Do I think it's nonsense? Oh yes, absolutely. And to really sell the idea, the advocates of this theory also have a specific patent that they point to as evidence, specifically US patent number 8671381, which covers new manufacturing techniques for advanced semiconductors. To be fair, this one sounds potentially a bit compelling, doesn't it? There's circumstantial evidence for the claim, and further to that, if you allow me a moment to don my own tinfoil hat, it's not like we don't live in a civilization in which whistleblowers who spent decades speaking out against and exposing major industrial manufacturers mysteriously just decide to kill themselves right when they're on the very cusp of achieving their goal of bringing their former employer down, which also just happens to be a certain superpower's biggest and therefore most important defense supplier, despite having no financial issues, no family issues, and no mental health issues of any kind. I know what George is talking about, and he's not naming the company because it's very legally complicated. But you know it is, everyone listening, don't you? Who's that whistleblower who works for a large company? He's recently, there was an article, it's like another one turns up dead, and it's like, oh my god, it's terrifying. It's not Vladimir Putin. I was just thinking it sounds like Putin. It's not, it's a giant company. With all of that in mind then, the idea that an individual or cabal of individuals from a vital and lucrative industry would just come together to commit an act of self-serving mass murder, maybe even with state support, suddenly doesn't feel beyond the realm of possibility. Make no mistake, it's certainly implausible, and to ever claim it authoritatively would require a weight of evidence far greater than mere coincidence. But it is certainly something to be entertained and not just immediately dismissed. Yeah, is it possible? Yes. Do I think it's likely? Absolutely not. Should it be looked into? Sure. But alas, as you've no doubt already reasoned from its inclusion in this chapter, this idea, though compelling, is complete and utter bollocks. Why? Well, that would be due to the simple fact that patents are treated like all other property in the US, in that when you die, it's chucked into your wider estate to be divvied out, either through the way outlined in the owner's will or through a probate court deciding on the deceased's behalf who it should go to in line with intestacy laws. As a result of this, there was literally no way for other still alive employees of Freescale or any other looming corporate actor to take control of the patent after their death unless the deceased workers had previously consented to it, or which they hadn't, thus rendering the conspiracy theory thoroughly debunked. Wait, why would the patents wouldn't they be owned by the company? These people work for Freescale, they come up with an idea, Freescale patents it. Like if you come up with an idea in your own time, it's yours. But if you're doing it on company time, then the company gets the patent, don't they? Maybe you get named on it, but it's theirs. And then the theory of killing off all these people so that the company collapses and can be bought up for the cheap with all the patents, that still stands. Another conspiracy theory suggests that someone took remote control of 9M MRO for some reason. At face value, this theory sounds absolutely absurd, easily up there with the black hole theory for just sheer disconnection from reality. Nah, the black hole theory is truly insane. This one is just regular insane. But the most veteran of tinfoil hat wearers, however, will draw attention to a patent that Boeing filed in February 2003 and was later awarded in November 2006, the snappily named System and Method for Automatically Controlling a Path of Travel of a Vehicle, known more commonly as the Boeing Uninterruptible Autopilot, which, to simplify it quite a bit, was a system for 9/11 proofing aircraft by making them able to receive a signal inputted either in the cockpit or remotely that would completely disable the cockpit and put the aircraft on the ground at a nearby airport completely automatically. Conspiracy theorists who endorse this theory look at this patent and go, aha! A wrong'un of some caliber must have got hold of that signal, either crashed MH370 or taken it somewhere off for use in some later naughty business. I imagine that signal is incredibly secure. The eagle-eared among you, however, will have noticed two things. A, the fact that I haven't been slagging people who believe in this theory off for the last 200 words, and B, the fact that this explanation is included in the conspiracy theories chapter, and thus is clearly total bollocks. But why? Because as presented presented, it does sound kind of compelling, doesn't it? Well, firstly, there's the fact that a 9M MRO never had the opportunity to get it fitted, as explained by the official crash report. Quote, 9M MRO was delivered in May 2002 to Malaysia Airlines before the patent was issued in 2006. The aircraft was under their control for the entire time after delivery, except for a short duration at Pudong, Shanghai Airport, China in August 2012, when it underwent wingtip repair by Boeing. Even then, the repair was under the oversight of Malaysia Airlines engineers. Aircraft modification installation data do not indicate that any systems like that described in the patent were installed on the aircraft post-delivery and during in-service. Airworthiness protocols require that all modifications are approved for installation and a record kept of each modification incorporated. There is no reason to believe any systems like that described in the patent either were or could have been incorporated without the knowledge of Malaysian Airlines. Yeah, and why would they? Malaysian Airlines probably want something like this. It's a good thing. And they're just like, why would it wouldn't be secretly installed. It wasn't there. It's a conspiracy theory. But such an explanation is a mere warning shot of debunkery, folks, because there is something else that comes in with the strength of a nuke and absolutely eviscerates this conspiracy theory. The fact that it turns out there is a big difference between simply patenting something and actually rolling it out as a viable technology, as no aircraft, period, has ever actually been fitted with this system, as also explained by the official report. Quote, Boeing has confirmed that it has not implemented the patented system or any other technology to remotely pilot a commercial aircraft and is not aware of any Boeing commercial aircraft that has incorporated such technology. The technology was never installed on any aircraft. From the foregoing, there is no evidence to support the belief that control of the aircraft 9M MRO, operating as MH370, could have been or was taken over remotely. So yeah, I think we can consider this point thoroughly debunked, ladies and gents. Unless, of course, that's just what they want us to think. It's not. That's not what happened. And of course, what litany of conspiracy theories would be complete without an appearance from those cheeky scamps, the Jews? Oh my! I was going to say aliens, but it's the Jews today. Okay. Present as they always are in seemingly every conspiracy theory for some reason. One of the Jewish-orientated conspiracies, because yes, there's more than one of them, doesn't claim to know why they supposedly hijacked MH370, but knows with absolute certainty that they did. Because, and to get this for a wrinkle-brained take the likes of which has hitherto be beholden by man, a Jewish bloke didn't turn up for his flight. And yes, that's literally it. Good lord. This is a surprisingly common thing in conspiracy theories. People who, dare I say, might just be mildly emanating the latent odor of anti-Semitism will trawl through everyone even slightly connected to a tragedy, and when they find out a Jewish fellow who had the shit that day called in sick or drove over a nail and punctured his tire, thus escaping the tragedy through the fickle hand of fate as he sat bent over at the side of the road instead, will point to our hypothetical Hasidic bloke's absence and go, aha! The Jews didn't turn up, therefore they must have been behind it. Naturally, such claims are batshit insane and hold about as much water as a bucket which has just had a full magazine of birdshot emptied into it. Take the archetypal example of this kind of conspiracy, the claim that 4,000 Jews supposedly didn't turn up for work on 9/11, and thus, well, that's proof that the little hat lads were behind it all. Not only is that 4,000 figure a complete fabrication, one flagrantly pulled out of someone's posterior, but up to 400 Jews did die on 9/11, which could make them potentially more than 10% of the overall death toll. So yeah, it's nonsense. Wait, yeah, that's... How many people died on 9/11? 3,000? 2,000? Siri, how many people died on 9/11? Siri's just not answering me today. Good times. 9/11 death toll. I think it was like 2,000 or 3,000, right? Okay, so 3,000. So basically, how many was it? 400? Yeah, that's well over 10% of the death toll. I don't think 10% of people in America are Jews, so Jews disproportionately died in larger amounts. Well done, conspiracy theorists. Well done. As for MH370 specifically, however, the Jews didn't turn up, caught them red-handed like conspiracy, does at least have some grounding in empirical fact. A teeny tiny bit that can only be viewed through a space telescope, and even then only in tiny 1990s resolution, because sure enough, that one Jewish fella, who I won't name because I'm sure he's had quite enough pestering on this matter over the years, was not on the flight as he had planned to be, but it was because his Orthodox Jewish travel agent back in Israel refused to book him an itinerary that would have him travel on Shabbat, which for reasons that I don't really understand if I'm being completely honest, but Jewish friends reassure me is absolutely totally a thing, is a big no-no under Orthodox Jewish law, and being the pious sort of fellow that he is, upon discovering this, he promptly slapped himself on the forehead and uttered words to the extent of, "Oy vey, it's the Sabbath, innit? I guess I have to fly home the next day." It could possibly be that just the travel agent was like, "Dude, you're not doing that." And the guy's, "Oh, for fuck's sake, I'm not Orthodox. I just want to travel on the Saturday. F you." And he's like, "I shall not book you it on the Saturday." That's literally it. So not only was it a real stretch to begin with, saying that the proof was a single solitary Jew not turning up for their flight, but it also turns out that he didn't so much not turn up for it, as he never even booked it to begin with, and had a perfectly normal reason for doing so. So I think it's fair to say that this one is thoroughly debunked. But wait, there's more! Because as I said, that is far from the only Jewish-themed conspiracy relating to MH370, as there also exists the conspiracy that Mossad, Israel's CIA equivalent, hijacked the planes so that they could ferret it away and later use it for some kind of Machiavellian terrorist scheme, with the usual one given being some kind of false flag terror attack on itself in order to start a war with Iran or to fly themselves into some kind of high-value Iranian attack. But unlike the last Jewish conspiracy we looked at, which had at least the teeniest kernel of truth to it, and then had that kernel morphed and inflated to create a monument to pure bullshit, there's nothing to substantiate this one. Not a single piece of spurious physical evidence, not a single out-of-context coincidental fact that can be misinterpreted. Just absolutely bugger all. Unsatisfied by this dead end, I took to Twitter, or X, or whatever it's called this week, and headed upstream to try and find the source of this river of utter nonsense. And what appears to have happened is that the owner of an anonymous egg account one day decided to don his tinfoil hat with a protective layer of splash-proof cling film, overdose on red pills, and, using the resultant intellectual diarrhea, squirt out an overflowing toilet's worth of utter bullshit just out of thin air. After that, a few other types, the sorts whose hollow heads whistle when they turn around quickly, found the giant steaming turd of misinformation presented most tantalizing somehow, and then shared it further, thus allowing this idea to take root in the deepest and darkest corners of conspiracy circles. And now, put a peg on your nose, folks, because we aren't done wading through the fusty sewer of thinly veiled anti-Semitism just yet, because there is one more such theory that we need to take a look at. This posits that the two Iranian passengers lost on MH370, who were later found to be traveling on stolen passports. Really? God damn. Okay, that's the thing that happens. The only reason we know about this, I don't think they've got anything to do with it crashing. The only reason we know about this is because it was massively investigated, which makes you think people must be flying on stolen passports all the time, which is extremely concerning. Conspiracy theorists say they're part of a Mossad plot to hijack the plane. Right, the Iranians. Either to carry out an immediate attack or store the planes somewhere off the grid for later use. Why did Mossad get the blame for this supposed conspiracy, given the fact that, they were Iranian? Well, don't ask. Crowbarring the Jews into conspiracy theories just seems to be the done thing for some reason. And that crowbarring is also what makes this theory immediately fall flat on its face. Had the theory posited that it was the Iranians who had hijacked the plane for terrorist purposes, it might at least get a "ooh, maybe" out of me, given that the nation isn't exactly averse to a bit of terroristing from time to time. Yes, famously, the Lockerbie bomber was Iranian, right? And then the Scottish let him out of prison. He killed like 200 people. What the fuck, Scotland? But alas, since they took a sharp turn right with the specifics, no, I'm forced to just immediately dismiss it as nonsense. And that brings us to the end of the Jewish portion of today's podcast. And with that now out of the way and thoroughly debunked, let's move on. Another conspiracy theory posits that MH370 was shot down. At first, it may sound peculiar that I have chosen to include this one as a conspiracy theory because it doesn't sound that out there, does it? Wait, later that year, another Malaysian Airlines plane was shut down, but it was flying over the Russian separatists in Ukraine. Especially considering the fact that in July 2014, only a few months after MH370's disappearance, Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was shot down over eastern Ukraine with the loss of 298 souls. Indeed, so credible does it sound at first glance that in my preliminary outline of today's script, I'd intended for this theory to be discussed later in the video, where I will be breaking down the credible theories. But then I started doing more expansive research to fill out that preliminary outline, as it were, and I quickly came to the realization that actually no, this one's total bullshit too. The first reporting on the idea that I was able to track down came from the American pundit Rush Limbaugh, then host of his own rather large and self-titled radio show, which was syndicated on 650 radio stations across the country. From such an expansive reach, I naturally assumed that he must have something decent to discuss, as Please. People have expansive reach and they talk about utter nonsense all the time. As after all, with a reach of that size, his show was hardly a conspiracy theorist chatting bollocks into his laptop's built-in webcam. Yeah, I mean, but Alex Jones has a huge show. And it's insane. But alas, no. I can't speak to the quality of his other reporting, as I'd never even heard of him before discovering this segment, but in this case, it was just a big old swing and a miss from old Rush. Yeah, I know the name Rush Limbaugh, but I have no idea what he does or who he is.
Rush Limbaugh was right all along. Conservative republicanism is the answer.
His specific claim is the following. Say the jet is flying along and you have a total electronic failure, but the engines keep working. So then the crew says, we gotta get back home. We gotta get back to Kuala Lumpur. We can't fly with no electronics. It's dark. Nighttime. They fly over a bunch of unfriendly countries, and they can't identify themselves, and they're not identified. There are no lights on. There's been a total electronic failure. What if some hostile country flew up there and shot it down, and then discovered their mistake, and nobody wants to admit what happened? I don't think so. They have, backups. They account for this situation in aviation. On later shows, he would then go on to further evidence this idea by pointing out other airlines that have been shot down, such as Iran Flight 655 and Korean Airlines Flight 007, stripping all of the context and specifics out of those incidents and just generally pointing at them and saying, see, other airlines have been shot down, thus the mighty musings of Rush stand vindicated. Behold the expansiveness of my grey matter. I don't think he said exactly that, but something along those lines. And if my 10-minute Google session on Rush has led me to understand him correctly, this hypothetical declaration might also have been followed by a cheeky little suck my robust Republican rod libtards type comment. Oh, okay, so he's one of these. He's like a, super political right-wing dude. This then put the idea into the public zeitgeist, which led to it being picked up by other outlets, with an example being Scott Merowitz, then a reporter for the Associated Press, describing it as one of the leading plausible theories, but qualified that by saying there was no evidence that Flight 370 was brought down by a government entity. The idea also gained traction in printed literature, with British writer Nigel Cawthorne producing what was, in my opinion, a quick and cheap cash-in book called Flight MH370 The Mystery, inside of which he mused on the idea, among others. The evidence for my damning claim regarding his work, the fact that this book was published in May 2014, barely 2 months after MH370's disappearance, years before the official crash reports, which this script heavily cites, were published. Yeah, that was just a cash grab. And it's going to be super speculative. But people want to read speculation when there's no concrete answers. In fact, at risk of blowing smoke up my own bottom, I'm willing to say outright that I believe all 28 pages of this script to be far better researched than all 246 pages that tome of bollocks, but I digress. Tome of bollocks? In George's opinion. Maybe in mine as well. I haven't read it, but it sounds like 2 months later and 246 pages without official crash reports. Come on. It's just going to be wild guesses. What also sees me damn the shoot-down theory as mere conspiracy is the fact that there's no evidence for it. There's literally none, not even if we really reach really far and intentionally obfuscate our own reasoning to justify anything that may give it validity. For starters, the idea that 9M MRO could lose all power and keep flying is the preserve of fantasy. You see, modern airlines are fitted with these things called ram air turbines, or RATs for short. This is a small wind turbine that can be extended should an airliner enter difficulties as to provide enough juice to power critical systems, and thus, hopefully anyway, mean that even an otherwise electrically dead airliner can find its way down to the ground. Further to that, we aren't living in the black and white days anymore, when airliners were more or less purely mechanical machines with every button linking to a physical solenoid and every physical control linking directly to the control surfaces with vast arrangements of gears, rods, and linkages. It is all electrical nowadays, with airliners being controlled by so-called fly-by-wire systems. Literally, you're flying by the wire because it's all electronically actuated. If there was a total electronic failure, as Rush outlined, one in which even the RAT wasn't working, the plane would simply fall out of the sky, and it is as simple as that. In addition to all of those rather out-there conspiracy theories, there were also several bogus discoveries of MH370 made over the years too, which are also worth discussing, if for no other reason than to make it clear that both myself and the much more wrinkle-brained types who do air crash investigation full-time are fully aware of them and have dismissed them as being nothing but hokum. The first came in 2016, when Brit Ian Watson, who has been described as everything from a tech expert by the New Zealand Herald and a conspiracy theory by WION in India, claimed that he had found MH370's wreck on Google Earth, specifically in the Cambodian jungle, saying, quote, "I just thought I'd have a wander through. I work in digital video, so I'm on Google Earth all the time. I was on there a few hours here, a few hours there. If you add it up, I spent hours searching for places a plane could have gone down. And in the end, you can see the place where the plane is. It is literally the greenest, darkest part you can see. He then went on to explain that his evidence for this potentially being MH370 was the gap in the rear fuselage in the pictured aircraft, and to be fair to Ian, I was reluctant to include his discovery as a conspiracy theory because, while it is a stretch to be sure, which he himself readily admits, his speculation has at least some basis in verifiable data. What weighed my scale down on the it's a conspiracy theory side, however, is the fact that professional opinion almost immediately debunked his claim, and yet he continued to exalt it. No, dude, if you find something cool, bring it up, and then if someone proves conclusively that it's not the case, it's time to be like, cool, I was wrong. Just be wrong. It's okay to change your opinion, everybody. It's okay. It's a good thing. For example, it was pointed out that it was all but impossible for a plane to crash land in a jungle that is, full of massive trees and all of that, and then remain largely intact, and also due to the fact that the pictured aircraft still has components of MH370 that washed up over the years, as we discussed earlier. Credit to Ian, however, he did at least put his money where his mouth was, and he travelled to Cambodia in both 2018 and 2019 to search for it, or so I would have said anyway had I not stumbled across an article from Cambodian News English saying that they were denied permission to publish details of his trips due to an exclusive deal with a UK tabloid, and that Ian only spent a few days looking for MH370. Now, in my humble opinion, which I say explicitly because I don't want to be sued by the absolute parasites that are the English tabloids, what happened here was the Daily Mirror, who clearly are the exclusive tabloid in question when you look at their expansive and exclusive reporting on the matter, were having a grand old time kneeling over the 239 corpses of MH370's victims, sucking their dignity dry for clicks like the vampires they are, in my opinion, when they realised that by shipping Ian off to the jungle for a photo shoot, they could pump out a few articles of vacuous verbal vomit to get some juicy clicks. It's an interesting theory of mine, isn't it? But it's one that I ultimately will not judge Ian for, because all I'm saying is I found lots of planes on Google Earth myself in Barbados at some place called Grantley Adams International Airport, and if some tabloid rag wants to fly me out there first class to check out if any of them are MH370, I'll be at Heathrow Airport quicker than off a shovel. I'll have to stay at a 5-star resort, though. I'll need to be well rested for my search. Yeah. You should do it, George. Someone should pay you to do that. It's not going to be me, because obviously it's nonsense. Our next bogus discovery came in 2016 when self-described UFO hunter Scott Waring said he might have accidentally discovered MH370 while investigating an old UFO sighting from back in 2013 off the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. Stop to think about that for a second. South Africa, the place that, according to Travel Math, is 11 hours and 40 minutes away from Malaysia, when MH370 only had enough fuel for 7 hours and 31 minutes of flight. Sure, bits of it washing up makes sense, but the whole thing, no chance. At this point, I was going to make a sarcastic comment about not wanting to question the intellectual credentials of a UFO hunter, but little did I know, Scott already has such criticisms covered, and he frankly left me looking a right, because when I asked about how it could have ended up so far beyond its range, he simply answered, powerful currents. Mystery solved, unknown decoded, end of video, thanks for watching. Or is it? Because while I'm sure you're very convinced by that absolute broadside of a counterpoint that Scott emptied right into my deeply entrenched pessimism, let me just point out that Scott also believes that a Easter Island-like head statue, as well as another statue of an elephant-like creature with a short trunk, is proof of life on Mars, without a doubt. Scott is a bit loopy, in my opinion, allegedly. Neither of these claims have been backed up by actual scientists or other wrinkle-brain space types, so all things considered, maybe let's just take what he says about MH370 with a little bit of a pinch of salt. Probably a good idea. Beyond just those, there were quite a few more discoveries of MH370 over the years, but as they all more or less followed the pattern of those which we've already seen, i.e. I found a plane-shaped thing on Google Maps, I reckon it's MH370, I do, give me money please, we won't worry too much about them, we already have the idea. Has anyone ever found anything on Google Earth, or like Google Maps, satellite images, or whatever, and that it did actually solve a mystery? That'd be cool.
Am I a joke to you?
And moving on, now that we've seen the what of MH370 conspiracies laid out pretty comprehensively, we should now reshift our focus and take a look at the why of the matter. Why do people believe this stuff in the first place? That's a big question, to put it mildly, and frankly, it's one that is significantly beyond my intellectual pay grade, as naught but a humble graduate of the fourth worst university in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Really? What university is that? But not to worry, folks, because while I might be a simpleton cursed to walk the land with a brain as smooth as butter and as wrinkled as an expertly ironed shirt, there are some who walk among us who possess brains so sufficiently wrinkled that they exist as vast, rolling mountain ranges of grey matter crammed tightly within their craniums. People such as Susanna Marjanitz. And me. A giant wrinkly brain, George. She worked as a professor at Zagreb University Institute of Ethnology and Folklore and just happened to write a paper titled Conspiracy Theories as Urban Legends with a Paranoid Matrix in 2023. That does sound like some big brain shit. Which specifically pulls apart the why of the MH370 conspiracy theories at great length. How handy. So now, rather than rely on half-cocked explanations that I pull out of my own rectum, let's instead see what she has to say on the matter. One of the core premises of Marjanick's exploration is the idea that conspiracy theories provide a bridge between the realms of the known and the unknown. They offer an alternative narrative to official accounts, which might fail to satisfactorily explain certain events or phenomena. This is especially relevant in the context of MH370, she posits, where the disappearance of the flight remains shrouded in mystery, and thus creates a fertile ground for various theories that attempt to fill the vacuum of uncertainty. Yeah, this is why conspiracy theories are appealing, because it's like, people don't like not having answers. And if someone comes along and they're like, hey, this is the answer, they'll be like, okay, cool, because people like answers. These theories are compelling not because they are necessarily true in an empirical sense, but because they offer a narrative that provides some semblance of understanding and control over events that are otherwise inexplicable. Boom. So I like, what was your name? Marjanitz? I like you. You're smart. She then goes on to explain the paranoid aspect of conspiracy theories while drawing upon the works of other scholars such as Jack Bratick, who claim the absence of evidence in a theory is paradoxically interpreted as evidence of its validity in what can only be paraphrased as a bit of our old Neanderthal monkey brains coming back to bite us all in the the very same paranoid, pattern-recognizing brain that we inherited from our caveman ancestors who got paranoid when a bush started shaking and growling at them, and thus lived long enough to have kids, rather than the ones who went for a pokeabout in said bush and then found themselves being lunch for a saber-toothed tiger before they had the opportunity to sling up one Mrs. Caveman and pass their genes on. According to Marjanitz, because those paranoid genes naturally survived in greater quantity, they go on to inspire our thinking in similarly rooted but outwardly very different manner today. Instead of leaping to conclusions about the threatening nature of growling bushes, we leap to conclusions about the threatening nature of world events we cannot understand or explain, thus wacky theories about MH370. Beyond that, Marjanitz also goes on to explore the socio-political underpinnings of conspiracy theories, explaining that they can also be manifestations of feeling of mistrust toward authoritative knowledge sources and power structures. In a world where information is both omnipresent and contested, she goes on, conspiracy theories present an alternate epistemology that challenges the monopoly of official narratives, reflecting widespread skepticism towards institutions and the media. Okay, so that's a lot of big words to basically say people are skeptical of people with power. This skepticism, she stresses, is not baseless in and of itself, and I myself agree, because after all, I don't think there's many people in the audience who think the media doesn't lie to them to some degree or another, but in her view, it becomes baseless when it strays away from empirical rationality and heads towards gut instinct straw clutching instead. Now, all that's great, but we shouldn't render our choices in an intellectual vacuum. So what do others have to say about why people believe the MH370 conspiracy theories? Well, in news that I'm sure Ms. Marjanitz will be chuffed to bits with, her psychological peers seem to agree with her. There's a similar paper titled Conspiracy Theories, Psychology Behind Flight MH370, written by Sarah Mondi, largely agrees with her, suggesting that the lack of conclusive information about the flight and the inherent human tendency to seek patterns and meaning in ambiguous events fuels the proliferation of such theories, given the absence of any other objectively far more rational and empirical explanation. Yeah, I mean, none of this surprises me. It's like, I know we should look at other people who are saying other things, but it's like, rationally, this makes a ton of sense. And I feel like because I've come across this before, I'm willing to give it a lot more heed without the need for it to be backed up, because I've just heard it from other reliable sources before. Can I name them? No. Then there is the article written by academic psychologist Rob Brotherton for New Scientist titled Flight MH370, The Allure of the Conspiracy Theory. In many ways, his article has echoes of our previous two about it as it zooms in on humans' inclination to fill in the gaps, so to speak. But he takes a slightly different route to explaining it as a specific subconscious desire to attribute ambiguous events to intentional action rather than accidents or flukes of fate. According to him, our simple caveman brains just find themselves more at ease in the world that way. Useful insights can also be found from psychologists who focus not just on MH370 specifically, but on conspiracy theories more generally, offering broader perspectives than what we ourselves can apply to MH370 to broaden our understanding or by directly supporting those more specific takes. Whether we like it or not, conspiracy theories are a part of MH370's story and mythos now, so we can't ignore them if we wish to be diligent. Plus, if nothing else, there's a bit of a laugh looking at them, and it leaves us better prepared not to fall victim to them in the future. With that done, we're now left with two credible theories to explore, the so-called fire theory and pilot suicide theory. So let's bring this chapter to a close and take a look at them. Yeah, I'm leaning into the pilot suicide theory. That's my thing. I recorded some of this yesterday, and I went to the barber in the afternoon and had a conversation with him about this. So now I don't remember whether I was talking to you guys about it or whether I was talking to my bloody barber about it. It's the hazard of recording these things, because they're so long I take breaks, and one of those breaks included going to get my beard trimmed. And now it's the next day. The fire theory. The fire theory is exactly what it sounds like. The idea that an onboard fire of some kind brought down MH370. Now, this is a sensible enough theory to be sure, but it isn't one that I personally lean towards, and you'll soon see why. Many people have suggested this theory over the years, with it being a point of speculation from almost the second that MH370 first dropped off the radar, but most initial musings were mere speculations, either educated guesses in the absence of substantial evidence at best, or mere rolling newsreel fodder at worst. Eventually, however, more fleshed out explanations of the fire theory began to emerge, and three lead causes rose to the fore. Defective lithium-ion batteries in the cargo hold, which ignited and caused a fire that began in the cockpit, either from a malfunctioning windscreen heater or an oxygen leak, or that the lithium-ion batteries came into contact and reacted dangerously with a complement of mangosteens on board and started a fire. Wait, is that a fruit? Also known as the purple mangosteen, is a tropical evergreen tree with edible fruit native to Southeast Asia. Wait, why is someone taking mangosteens on a plane? Why is a battery setting mangosteens on fire? That seems like a bit of a stretch. On the first point, the possibility of a fire started by defective batteries, MH370 was actually carrying quite a fair complement of them down in its hold. 2,453 kilograms worth of lithium-ion batteries, walkie-talkie accessories, and chargers. To be precise, of which 221 kilograms were actual batteries. That's a lot of batteries! These were not marked down as dangerous cargo on the manifest, and thus avoided being flagged for the pilot's attention prior to takeoff, although they were inspected physically by ground crew before, during, and after they were loaded into the hold. The official crash report went into great depth exploring these batteries and the possibility that they caused the fire, and didn't find any fault in the way that this potentially dangerous cargo was packed. Quoting, "The cargo consignment, including lithium-ion batteries, was packed and loaded in accordance with the International Civil Aviation Organization's ICAO technical instructions and the applicable regulations of the International Air Transport Association, IATA, Dangerous Goods and Regulations, DGR." Okay, I don't think it's the batteries. It then spends dozens of pages outlining exactly what that means, but I'll spare you a retelling of that, as it's just a tad dry. Trust me though, I've read it all, and it was indeed all totally kosher. Further to examining how the batteries were packed, the investigators also conducted extensive laboratory testing to assess the risk posed by lithium-ion batteries under flight conditions. These tests were aimed at understanding how these batteries might behave under various scenarios that could occur during flight, extremities of temperature, pressure, being knocked and jolted about, etc. This process too is documented over dozens of pages, which can be summed up with the following quote. Detailed laboratory simulations and tests were carried out to replicate the flight conditions. The results from those tests did not demonstrate any hazardous conditions that could lead to a thermal event or ignition. Yeah, not to mention, while this is a lot of batteries, I'm sure lots of batteries get carted around on planes all the time. If a plane's not full in the cargo hold, they fill it with other cargo, right? To get stuff places, because it's more efficient that way. All in all, the notion that the batteries alone caused a fire was near as damn it dismissed outright, with the report summing up its position on the matter with the following extract. Quote, examinations of the available satellite data and the recovered wreckage pieces showed no signs or evidence of in-flight or post-impact fire initiated by the lithium-ion batteries. I mean, it's good that they've been very thorough about all of this, but it does seem like there's not a lot of reasons to think that it was these batteries. As for the notion that a fire may have broken out in the cockpit due to either a malfunctioning windscreen heater or an oxygen leak, it is also discussed extensively in the crash report, which meticulously outlines the aircraft systems, their operations, and how they may present a danger to the aircraft in an operational context. Again, they spend a lot of pages doing this, so I'll summarize it for you all in brief. The musings on the windscreen heating system, which is used to prevent ice formation and to maintain visibility for pilots, revealed that such systems are designed with significant redundancies and safety measures, with the report saying the following to explain that fact. Quote, the window heat system of the Boeing 777-200ER is designed with multiple layers of redundancies to prevent failures that could lead to safety issues such as obscured visibility or potential fire hazards. Each window is equipped with independent heating elements that are controlled by separate circuits, reducing the likelihood of a complete system failure. God damn, planes are so well designed and so well engineered. They think about everything. This design approach ensures that even if one heating element or control circuit fails, alternative circuits can maintain the necessary function, thereby significantly enhancing the system's overall safety and reliability. End quote. Just to be safe, however, they also investigated 9M MRO's maintenance record, just on the off chance that some deferred maintenance had created a dangerous and totally avoidable situation, with them saying the following to surmise their findings, quote, all window heat systems were confirmed to be functioning appropriately with no reported anomalies or malfunctions in the flight logs prior to the disappearance. Okay, well, again, I don't know why people suspected that it might be this heating and the windscreen heater thing, but it seems pretty clearly that it wasn't. This certainly seems conclusive enough, but one could still speculate that the windscreen heater may have completely failed to the point of becoming a fire hazard all within the time frame of a single flight. Yeah, I mean, fair enough, but lack of evidence isn't evidence. Wait, is that the right term? I mean, sure, it could have happened, but you need to prove it. Or at least show me that it's likely. Certainly, this is within the realms of possibility, and given the absence of other causal evidence, one should never say never, as it were, but given the fact that such a rapid and expansive failure of the system is all but unheard of in modern civil aviation, I personally wouldn't be betting on that fact. So, how about the oxygen leak theory then? Certainly, it's a sensible enough notion, given the fact that oxygen is, a bit important for the whole breathing malarkey, and thus is everywhere inside a plane, and it fuels fires. It definitely stands to reason that too much oxygen ending up somewhere it shouldn't could cause or worsen a fire that could bring MH370 down. Sure enough, the report also gave this matter some consideration, starting its musings by again looking at 9M MRO's maintenance record. It summed up its findings by saying the following, quoting again, oxygen systems were inspected according to the routine maintenance schedule, and no defects were noted. The system's integrity checks, including pressure tests conducted during scheduled maintenance intervals, showed no signs of leakage or degradation of the system components. Furthermore, the report also discusses the general electrical system health and maintenance practices on board 9M MRO to draw attention to the fact that if something like an oxygen system did fail or was in the process of failing, the flight crew would have been aware and tried to do something about it. Quoting again, the aircraft was equipped with a sophisticated electrical load management system, or ELMS, designed to monitor electrical circuits and detect any abnormal patterns that might suggest short circuits. All in all, the crash investigation found no evidence supporting the idea that faulty electrical systems caused an onboard fire. Once again, never say never to a grounded idea until we do have the answer proved beyond all reasonable doubt, but I feel safe to say we can probably discount these two as probable causes. Yep, 100% agree, George. You, I, and the air crash investigators. So, three very important people weighing in on this. That brings us to the final reasonable potential cause of a fire, the mangosteen theory. All right, here we go. This theory posits that the mangosteen fruit, which MH370 had in its hold, 4,566 kilos worth in total, might have leaked, and the resulting juice then found its way to the lithium-ion batteries we discussed earlier, before it then reacted in some kind of horrible and unforeseen way that caused the batteries to ignite and thus brought the plane down. Is it really worth it to transport fruit by plane? Don't they transport fruit by boat? Isn't it? Because transporting shit by plane is really expensive. For fruit? Naturally, laboratory tests were conducted to get to the bottom of this possibility, with the specific concern being whether the organic compounds in mangosteen juice could chemically react with the materials within the lithium-ion batteries under certain conditions, and thus potentially lead to what the report called a thermal event. You and I would call that a fire. The crash report gives us lots of details on the methodology and findings of these tests, naturally with it saying the following regarding the foremost point, quote, "To assess the potential for a chemical reaction between mangosteen juice and the electrolyte in lithium-ion batteries, several tests were conducted under controlled laboratory conditions. These included mixing mangosteen extract with various battery electrolyte solutions at different concentrations and temperatures." Continuing on with the details of the testing process, the report then specifies, quoting again, "The tests were designed to determine if any exothermic reactions occurred that would generate enough heat to ignite a fire. The parameters tested included ambient pressure typical of a cargo hold at cruising altitude, variations in temperature from 4 to 40 Celsius, and varying ratios of mangosteen juice to electrolyte." This is extremely thorough. These tests were meticulous, involving, quote, "various combinations of juice concentration, temperature variations, and pressure settings to replicate the cargo environment as closely as possible." The juice tests, however, while expansive, yielded no answer. Quoting again, "These tests were carried out and the results are as followed. This was highly improbable on board MH370 with a comparatively short flight duration and under controlled conditions." Note, highly improbable. So again, we can't say with absolute certainty that it wasn't the mangosteen juice reacting with the batteries which caused a fire that brought down MH370, but the reasonable takeaway is that it almost certainly wasn't that. Alright, with that ruled out, the investigators then expanded their focus and started looking at the idea that the reaction between mangosteen juice and lithium batteries may have released some kind of flammable gas instead, which could have potentially accumulated, ignited, and thus started a fire that way. Again, however, it's almost certainly a no, with the report stating, again, quoting, "Furthermore, additional tests were conducted to assess whether any flammable gases could be released from the reaction between the mangosteen juice and the lithium-ion batteries, which could potentially accumulate and ignite, creating a fire hazard. These tests also failed to produce any flammable or combustible gases in concentrations that would pose a risk of ignition or combustion." So then, it appears that beyond all reasonable doubt, it wasn't the lithium batteries in and of themselves, or malfunctioning systems, or the lithium batteries reacting with the mangosteen fruit, and so it appears we found ourselves at a bit of a dead end at the end of this chapter. So let's bring it to a close, and move on and have a look at the second and final reasonable cause: the pilot suicide theory. The pilot suicide theory revolves around Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, who we met all the way back in Chapter 1. So let's begin by learning a bit more about him. Born on the 31st of July, 1961 in Penang, Malaysia, he lived and breathed for aviation from basically the very moment of his birth, with both him and his parents remembering it being an immediate obsession that formed in the young Shah's mind from the moment he first saw a distant airliner roaring overhead, a minuscule speck of wonder that would go on to dictate the trajectory of his entire life. Unfortunately for Shah, however, while he might have had all the passion an aspiring young aviator could ever hope for, fate had denied him the one thing that he needed above all else to ensure his success. Is going to be money. Being a pilot, getting to be a commercial pilot is really expensive. It was money. There we go. For his family was a modest and working class one, and if you think it's difficult to get into commercial piloting now in the developed West as a working class kid, what with having to drop $25,000 on getting your PPL, $10,000 on your PPL instructor certificate just to prove to airlines that you have the enthusiasm needed to get a spot on their in-house pilot's course, which you then pay for with a $150,000 loan, which is not refundable should you flunk out, well, it was a whole other kettle of fish a few decades back living in Malaysia, which was still pretty poor and thus offered very few options for a modestly heeled chap such as Shah to get into the trade. Yeah, so just to sum up there, you've got to spend basically $35,000 out of your own pocket before you can even be considered to train to be a commercial pilot, and then it's going to cost you another 150 grand in loans, which is just an extraordinary amount of money. You're talking nearly 200 grand. God damn. And I know people are like, "Oh, Simon, America university is really expensive," but it's still a load of money, isn't it? Fortunately, however, while fate might have denied Shah the funds needed to further his fascination for flight, it did give him one very useful thing to help him achieve it: a damn sharp mind between his ears, and so he knuckled down, adamant that come hell or high water his adult self would be working in a cockpit. This saw him attend Penang Free School, where he completed his Malaysian certificates in education, equivalent to British GCSEs or American PSATs, PSATs? I don't know how to pronounce that, with flying colours in 1978. This, along with his obvious enthusiasm, saw him win a place as a cadet pilot with the Malaysian Airlines system, Malaysia Airlines Forerunner, in 1981. Fortunately for Shah, they were undergoing an enormous expansion as Malaysia's economy was in the nascent stages of a boom, one which created a huge demand for pilots and thus forced them to look to recruiting and training promising young talent in-house rather than just relying on the rich kids and Air Force retirees who had filled their ranks previously. Yeah, that's another way to get to be a pilot, right? Join the Air Force, they'll train you to be a pilot, and then when your stint's over, become a commercial pilot. With that done, Shah then began his grueling and exhausting training, which he smashed out of the park and thus graduated 2 years later in 1983 with a full commercial pilot license, CPL, and instrument rating, or IR. To give you a typical idea of what this means, a CPL allows a pilot to operate as a paid professional pilot, unlike a PPL, which is purely a recreational license. Yeah, with a PPL, you can fly and you can take people places, but you can't charge them. Naturally then, because a CPL certified pilot won't just be killing himself and a couple of his mates if it messes up, prospective licensees are held to insane standards to be awarded it, having to generally, although it varies a bit country to country, already hold a PPL, pass a very rigorous medical examination, sit through thousands of hours worth of classroom instruction, simulated training and written examinations, and typically have around 150 to 200 flight training hours in the sky on a proper airliner. Yeah, even for my PPL, when I went to do the medical clearance for that, it was like there was a good bunch of questions and checkups and tests, and it's like, okay. As for instrument ratings, that qualifies a pilot to fly under so-called instrument flight rules, which, to simplify a bit, means flying an aircraft in weather conditions that obstruct visual sight and at night, both times when the pilot can't see anything and thus is seeing where they're going with their onboard instruments only, hence the name. He then has to do his type ratings, which simply confirm that a pilot is familiar with specific aircraft models and variants and thus is legally able to fly them. His first one of these he earned was for the Fokker F-27 Friendship later in 1983, and thus with that done, he was good to go and start working properly as a member of the flight deck, starting out as a second officer or co-pilot in layman's terms. He carried on in this role for another 8 years, eventually getting type ratings for the Boeing 737-200 and the Airbus A300. He then qualified as a fully fledged captain, earning type ratings for the Boeing 737-400 in 91, Airbus A330-300 in 96, and Boeing 777-200 in 98. This was then followed by qualification for type rating instructor and type rating examiner come November 2007, meaning that he was then able to both teach and assess pilots on their type rating qualifications. Pilots who reach that stage are nothing short of perfect. If there's any funny business in your record and question marks, any incidents at all that could raise an eyebrow over your capabilities, even the most tin pot of airlines would never submit you for those qualifications. All of this absolute wealth of experience and professionalism that Shah had built up over a long and glorious career meant that come March 2014, he had a total of 18,365 hours of flying experience under his belt and was widely considered to be one of the best pilots at Malaysia Airlines, period. Yeah, this guy is insanely qualified and background checked and just a legend of a pilot, it seems. So then, just what is the evidence to suggest that this pilot, most enviable and lauded, might have intentionally crashed MH370 as part of some kind of horrific mass murder come suicide plot? Why are we not considering the co-pilot, who probably doesn't have all of these incredible ratings and stuff? Well, it all hinges on Shah's home simulator, which had some eyebrow-raising roots in its history, to say the least. Well, okay, that's why. If you followed the MH370 story at all before clicking on this video, this is likely something that you're already familiar with to some degree, as the media over the years has made just a bit of a big deal over it. The idea that Shah did practice suicide runs on his home simulator. Exemplifying this is the following 2016 headline: exclusive, MH370 pilot flew a suicide route on his home simulator, closely matching final flight, as well as MH370 pilot flew suicide route on a simulator closely matching his final flight, which were run by New York Magazine and The Independent, respectively. These are both well-respected publications, right? I know The Independent is. I don't know New York Magazine so well, but it's not. They're not tabloids, as far as I'm aware. But we all know what the media are like, spewing utter shit to earn a few quid. Let's squeeze a fat dump out of Mother Teresa or Gandhi's well-earned saintly records for a click or two. Wait, don't Mother Teresa and Gandhi also have some fairly substantial controversies. So with that in mind, we find ourselves arriving at an important question. Is there any actual evidence to pin the blame on Shah? Well, to answer that, let's dismiss all the smooth-brained journos and their idiotic takes, and instead turn to the official Malaysian Safety Investigation Report, which said the following on the matter of Shah's simulator. Quote, "The Royal Malaysia Police, RMP, seized the Piloting Command's home flight simulator from his residence on the 15th of March 2014. The RMP documented more than 2,700 coordinates retrieved from separate file fragments, and most of them are default game coordinates. It was also discovered that there were 7 manually programmed waypoint coordinates that, when connected together, will create a flight path from Kuala Lumpur International Airport to an area south of the Indian Ocean through the Andaman Sea. These coordinates were stored in a volume shadow information file dated the 3rd of February 2014. The function of this file was to save information when a computer is left idle for more than 15 minutes. Hence, the RMP forensic report could not determine if the waypoints came from one or more files. The RMP forensic report on the simulator also did not find any data that showed the aircraft was performing climb, attitude, or heading maneuvers, nor did they find any data that showed a similar route flown by MH370. The RMP forensic report concluded that there were no unusual activities other than game-related flight simulations. What this means, the quote ends, what this means in simple terms is that on at least one occasion, Shah flew a route on his home simulator that vaguely matches the route that MH370 was flying when it disappeared. And I stress really vaguely, as it crosses it once at an angle and then keeps going at that same angle until it ends in the same kind of area of the world, but several thousand kilometers away. Is this a reason to be suspicious? Yeah, absolutely. Is it reason enough to chalk it up as our explanation, consider the job a good one, and end the video? No, absolutely not. While it is easy, and maybe even tempting in the absence of basically any other credible theory, to decide that this is the answer in and of itself, this is simply not enough evidence. Whoa. Okay, so when we started this episode, and George said, we think we've got a conclusive answer, I assumed that this was the conclusive answer. Those headlines that I'd seen or heard about where it's like the flight path matches it was like, that's the answer, and that we're pretty sure about it. But it appears not, so let's carry on. It could well be the start of an explanation, however, but what we need is more evidence to support it, and so let's now pick apart the rest of the investigation into Shah and see if there was anything that may have caused him to have a tragic mental spiral. They first investigated his financial history, lest he have any debts that may encourage him to make a very stupid decision, and they found the following, quote, "The PIC, Piloting Command, held bank accounts, 2 savings accounts, 1 current account, 2 national trust funds, and a joint account with his wife. He had a credit card. He was contributing to the pension. There is no record of him having secured a life insurance policy. He had 2 houses, one in Shah Alam, the other in Subang Jaya. They had taken a bank loan on one of the houses and had a mortgage insurance policy on this loan. He also had 3 vehicles. His gross monthly income and out-of-pocket expenses indicated nothing unusual. The PIC also had a trading account with an investment bank. The Central Depository System, or CDS, and trading accounts were open since the 13th of February 98 and the 19th of March 98 respectively. The CDS account was inactive, whereas the last transaction on the trading account was noted on the 3rd of February 2000. Okay, so basically nothing unusual. He's just a regular dude with regular shit. They then looked into Shah's medical history, beginning with his physical health, just in case he was suffering from anything that might make him give up, and again, do something very stupid. They found the following, quoting again, "The PIC had received treatment for minor medical ailments and was diagnosed as having osteoarthritis on the 5th of May 2007. He had a spinal injury on the 28th of January 2007 in a paragliding accident. He sustained a fracture of the 2nd lumbar vertebrae and underwent surgery on the 30th of January 2007 in a private healthcare facility. He was discharged on the 5th of February 2007 and went for a follow-up as advised. He was certified fit to fly in mid-2007 and went regularly for his 6 monthly medical examinations for his continued licensure as a pilot. For his pain, he was noted of taking analgesics on an irregular basis. Based on available information, he was not on any regular long-term medication for any chronic medical illness." Okay, so again, very ordinary medical history. Then investigators dug through his mental health records, where they found the following, quote, "The PIC's ability to handle stress at work and home was reported to be good. There was no known history of apathy, anxiety, or irritability. There were no significant changes in his lifestyle, interpersonal conflict, or family stresses." So again, a very ordinary mental health history. Being well aware that people can bury their mental anguish, be it out of shame, financial fears, or many other reasons, they didn't take his mental health record as gospel, however, and instead moved to confirm it themselves and outline their findings by saying the following, quote, "There were no behavioral signs of social isolation, changes in habits or interest, self-neglect, drug or alcohol abuse of the PIC. CCTV recordings at Kuala Lumpur International Airport, KLIA, on the 7th of March 2014 were evaluated to assess this behavioral pattern of the PIC from the time of arrival until boarding time. 3 previous CCTV recordings of the movements of the PIC in KLIA were also viewed to see the behavioral pattern and were compared with the CCTV recordings on the 7th of March 2014. On studying the PIC's behavioral pattern on the CCTV recordings on the day of the flight and the prior 3 flights, there were no significant behavioral changes observed. On all the CCTV recordings, the appearance was similar, i.e. well-groomed and attired. The gait, posture, facial expressions, and mannerisms were his normal characteristics. Okay, so again, absolutely nothing indicating that he was going to do anything. They then turned to the voice transmissions between MH370 and air traffic control, just in case some peculiarities in how Shah was speaking revealed the murderous intentions for which the investigators were searching. Having friends, colleagues, and professional analysts all sit through the recordings to identify anything awry. A total of 23 utterances were put to them in total, ranging from transmissions made on the ground when Shah was asking for taxiing clearance, all the way through to the ones made in the air while communicating with Kuala Lumpur Tower. And once again, nothing untoward at all was identified, with the report summing up its findings with the following, quote, "The team has made comparison of the voice sample analysis recorded previously and found no evidence that there was any stress or anxiety detected in the conversations." So then, having reviewed all of the evidence gathered regarding him, do we have any evidence to conclude that MH370 went down because of a murder-suicide plot orchestrated by its captain? Other writers motivated by a well-meaning want for an answer of any kind or a more malevolent desire to make sure they can slap a juicy and clickable title on the podcast may be inclined to say yes, but let's not kid ourselves. It'd be a bit of a stretch, wouldn't it? I completely agree. I went into this thinking that was the answer, and now I'm extremely doubtful that it was. Sure, a healthy sense of skepticism and a raised eyebrow in Shah's direction is more likely than not warranted, but to come out and say outright, bang, we've got it, no. We just don't have the evidence. Conclusion. It is an unfortunate fact of the matter that until the wreckage of 9M MRO is properly found and its black box data recovered, that there's little we can actually do but make educated guesses in the absence of hard evidence. As a betting man, if someone were to hold a gun to my head and force me to put my chips down on an answer, I have to admit it would be the pilot suicide theory for me. It brings me no joy to have to lean that way, mind you, as seemingly from the overwhelming bulk of what we have on him, Shah was above and beyond professional, with no need or desire to do anything nefarious, and so I'm reluctant to besmirch a potentially innocent name. But that flight simulator data of Shah's, coupled with the general weirdness of MH370's known flight path after crossing into Vietnamese airspace, well, I'll be damned if that isn't a great look as far as I'm concerned, even if it isn't a perfect one-to-one matchup from what we know. It isn't a great answer so much as it is the only answer as I see things. If our failure to decode the unknown here leaves you feeling disappointed, worry not, because as we speak, freshly minted cogs are returning that may just lead us to the answer. Okay, here we go. I was a bit worried George was going to be like, no, I don't actually have an answer for you. Or not an answer, but new speculation. And the cogs in question are two newly published reports. Analysis of the trajectory of flight MH370, published by Patrick Bleley and Jean-Luc Machard, and MH370 Flight Path Analysis Case Study, published by Richard Godfrey, Hans Coetzee, and Simon Maskell, both published in 2023. The former report offers a detailed analysis of the known and reconstructed trajectory of flight MH370, shedding lights on its probable route and final location. Their investigation, based on various data sources, including Inmarsat satellite data and meteorological reports, meticulously recalculates the aircraft's path from the last known radar contact near Sumatra to its presumed end in the southern Indian Ocean. They suggest that the aircraft was likely under manual control, performing complex maneuvers to avoid radar detection and following a trajectory that significantly deviates from any established flight paths. It also proposes an exact point of impact, this little copy and paste patch of anonymous southern Indian Ocean. Off the back of this, the report also proposes a new search area. One would extend the previous search region by 25 miles southwards, with a width of give or take 15 miles for a total search area of 350 new miles of ocean. As for the latter report, it also speculates that MH370 likely went down in the southern Indian Ocean, but instead suggests this little bit of ocean here. This area was deduced using satellite data, again from Inmarsat satellites, and is further supported by the findings of the WSPR, the Weak Signal Propagation Reporter Data Analysis, a system used for weak signal radio communication between amateur radio operators. These reports just might be the things that lead us to the answer we so desperately crave. Don't believe me? Well, put it this way. That first report, its search area of 350 miles, would only take an estimated 5 days to scan. An answer suddenly seems within arm's reach, doesn't it? Consider further the fact that both the Malaysian government and Ocean Infinity, an American maritime robotics company, have said that they're up for it, with the latter even saying that they are so confident on finding the wreckage that they're willing to do the search on a no-find, no-fee basis. And while part of me for sitting up in my chair and getting a bit interested in seeing how this plays out, it is completely foreseeable that in the next few years, we will finally know what happened to MH370, and if we do, don't you worry, dear viewers, I'll be straight in Simon's inbox poking him to greenlight a part 2. We'd definitely do that. Already greenlit. But before we bring this video to a close, there is one more thing we must do, and that's take time to remember the fact that above all else, the disappearance of MH370 was a catastrophic tragedy that claimed the lives of a staggering 239 people. Sure, it's both fun and fine to poke about some wacky conspiracy theories and do some sleuthing around the facts to try and figure out what the hell actually happened on that fateful day, but neither of those things should ever be done at the cost of belittling or demeaning the memory of those who died. So with that in mind, let's now take a few moments to remember some of the passengers who died, each and every one of them not just a faceless statistic, but an individual and a unique human being with their own experiences, wants, desires, and fears. They were people from various walks of life and nationalities, people like Muhammad Sulfan Ibrahim, a 33-year-old Malaysian who was embarking on a new chapter in his career with the Ministry of International Trade and Industry and was heading to Beijing for his posting. Puspanathan Subramanian, 34, a Malaysian marketing manager who was last seen by his family in the Kuala Lumpur Airport departure lounge, trying to abet his children's sadness at seeing daddy leave by promising them that he'll be back home soon, bearing lots of presents to cheer them up. Janjit Krishnama, 51, from India, who is the director of the International Collective in Support of Fish Workers and on her way to Mongolia for a conference. Kranti Shearsath, a 44-year-old Indian chemistry lecturer who was traveling to visit her husband who worked in North Korea for an international non-profit. They had 2 sons. Paul Weeks, a 39-year-old New Zealander, a mechanical engineer who was en route to a new job in Mongolia. He left behind a wife and 2 young sons. Philip Wood, 51, an American IBM executive who was described by friends as adventurous. He was on his way to one last trip to China before relocating to Kuala Lumpur. Wang Mo Heng, only 23 months old and the youngest passenger who was traveling with his parents back to China. The trip had meant to give the family a break from Beijing's poor air quality. The flight also carried a group of more than 20 Chinese artists and calligraphers returning from a cultural exhibition, including Li Rusheng, who was known for carrying a stamp that read, "God bless me," after surviving 3 heart attacks, and the oldest passenger, Lu Baotang, 79, a highly respected and well-known calligrapher. Sure, be enthralled, be enraptured, and be mysticized by the peculiar tale of MH370, but never allow yourself to fall into the trap of tokenizing and belittling the tragic end that these fine folks met. And of course, pray that one day we, but more importantly their families, finally know what happened to them.